Hello students and welcome to the final lecture in our renewable energy series. This one's kind of a catch-all category. We're going to talk about biomass, electric cars, hydrogen fuel, and battery technology. So it's pretty much everything that's left. All right, so let's get started. The biomass, this is a little chart from Miller. Realize biomass is any time you use plant matter for energy. So there's different kinds. You can convert it to ethanol and make a fuel out of it. You can burn it directly for biomass. There's gaseous biofuels, liquid biofuels, et cetera. So realize there's a lot of different types, and we'll talk about a few of those. If you're going to be using wood or other plants for biomass, what are your pros? It's potentially renewable as long as you don't deplete your soils and you can grow it back, so you don't get to the point where you can no longer grow things back. Like again, if you're harvesting trees for biomass and you're harvesting them faster than they can grow back. Or again, depleting soils. They can have a high net energy yield if they're burned near their source, and they're less need for imported oil, say if you're using ethanol. All right, what are the cons? We're currently exploiting it in non-renewable and unsustainable ways. Single species biomass plantations reduce biodiversity. Burning wood produces air pollutants such as particulates, as far as also you're putting carbon in the atmosphere. Although a lot of people look at biomass as being carbon neutral because you take the carbon out of the atmosphere when you grow the plant and then you put it back in the atmosphere when you burn the plant. So biofuels have a lower net energy than fossil fuels, which makes them a little bit less ideal from an economic standpoint. And then here's a big kicker for me is that if you have all these fields and fields of corn and you're growing it for ethanol production, you're not using that corn to feed people or animals. And so you have a competition between using the land for food production and using the land for energy production. All right, so biodiesel there's different kinds of biofuels. And biodiesel, the word diesel then is a different kind of fuel than say the ethanol fuels. And there's different types. There's palm, oil, rapeseed, soybeans. You can see the chart there with different kinds. And you can use it from vegetable oil, et cetera. So different kinds of vegetables. So as far as what your yields are, there's really high yield per acre for algae, but less so for other types. And palm oil production is fairly popular. All right, so 95% of biodiesel produced is used in the European Union. All right, so what are the downsides of it? People cut down rainforests and other, they basically reduce your biodiversity to have your palm oil plantation. So countries that have very high biodiversity are some of the places that are growing these palm plantations for palm oil. So that is a pretty big downside. All right, so again, Miller has a little chart. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I recommend looking at Miller for the trade-offs for biodiesel advantages and disadvantages. All right, so moving on to ethanol. There's three types. There's corn, there's sugarcane, and there's cellulosic, which the main type that I know about is called switchgrass. And Brazil is the Saudi Arabia of sugarcane ethanol. They saved 50% on oil import costs since the 1970s by changing their cars over to ethanol cars, or they call them flex fuel cars, where they can run on both ethanol and gas. In our country, we can put up to a certain percentage of ethanol in our cars without destroying the engines, but our cars are not able to run on pure ethanol. All right, so if you look at the areas, and this is kind of an older map now, but we have biomass resources in a lot of areas. And so it's quite extensive, especially in the Midwest. And your activity you'll be doing for this unit, you'll be looking at a more updated map of this. All right, so trade-offs for ethanol fuel. You get some reduction in CO2 emissions, but again, disadvantages, it's generally lower net energy yield for corn. Switchgrass is great because often switchgrass is basically the plant waste or the plant residue, but we're really more ramped up to use corn in this country than switchgrass at this point. So again, you're competing with, growing food on that same land, et cetera. And again, the engine technology is not as good, but I think again, that's probably a hurdle we could overcome for disadvantages. All right, so electric cars. These are becoming bigger and bigger, and the share with companies like Tesla and whatnot, the electric cars are really, and I think these are from the Tesla website. But as far as the electric car market, one of the big downsides of electric cars is that people are like, you can't drive them far enough. And this is the main reason why I didn't look at electric cars. We're a one-car household. I need to be able to drive my car on camping trips, cross country, et cetera. Electric cars so far aren't there. You also need the infrastructure to recharge them, which is coming. We're not just all the way there yet. So can you increase the range? And then the other piece is that electric cars have been much more expensive than regular cars for a long time, and that is starting to change. So electric cars were also out of my price range when I was looking to buy a car. So this quadrant over here is what you really want out of your electric cars. You want them to be affordable, and you want them to be able to go as far as a gas-powered car. All right, so based on grid emissions, you know, as far as people sometimes argue that, oh, it takes this much energy to produce an electric car and they're just as bad for the environment, and that's actually just not true. And, you know, so as far as grid emissions, the amount of fossil fuels used to generate electricity by region, when you look at this, you know, as far as like good, better, and best, you know, as far as electric car potential, but I'm going to go ahead and move on from this slide. All right, so what are the pros of electric cars? CO2 emission free while driving. And again, I say while driving, and then electricity is cheaper than gas most of the time, except for right now. All right, so what are the cons? Limited range. Again, that was a deal breaker for me. Charging time. This is getting better, but again, charging time has been long. You know, if you can fill your car with gas in like 10 minutes, if it's going to take you hours and hours to charge your car and you're on a road trip, that's just not going to work. So lack of infrastructure, and this again is changing. We are starting to get charging stations in more and more places, but again, I wouldn't want to drive one of these cars across country and bank on being able to like recharge it somewhere. What happens if you can't find a place and then you run out of charge, your car won't drive. They're currently expensive, and again, that's changing, it's coming down. And here's another big kicker though. How are you making the electricity that you're charging your cars with? If you have an electric car here in Seattle, where we're mostly hydropower, then you're more renewable and more carbon free. If you're charging your car in one of the East Coast states where they get most of their electricity from coal, it's not as clean. All right, and then what do you do with those batteries? They're full of nasty metals and whatnot. So that is a problem, is that the disposal issue with batteries. All right, so you know, if you've heard me talk, I've showed you that a bunch of these cons are changing as the technology progresses. All right, so finally, hydrogen fuel cars. You're basically using energy to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then you capture that hydrogen and you can use that as a fuel. You then combust that. So you mix it back with hydrogen, or you mix it back with oxygen, and what do? You make water. It's a two-way street. So, but if you know anything about, again, law of conservation of energy, is that the energy it takes to split that water is going to be the same amount of energy you get back when you combust it and make water again. It's it's a no-win. There's zero net energy out of this. So how do you make it work? And the idea is, how do you break that water apart in a way that you can use it for fuel? And so one of the ways that you would do it is, could you use solar power to split the water, and then you could put that hydrogen fuel in your buses, et cetera. So pros of hydrogen fuel. The source of hydrogen, it's plentiful. When burned, it produces no carbon dioxide. You do get some nitrogen oxides when you burn it, because whenever you're pulling in oxygen into an engine, whether it's a car engine or a hydrogen fuel engine, some of that nitrogen combusts and makes nitrogen oxides. And then we're going to talk more about that in the next unit on air pollution. So you can reduce air pollution problems and greenhouse gas emissions. What are the cons? You need an energy source to split that hydrogen from water. Currently, a lot of non-renewable energy sources are used to produce that hydrogen fuel, so it's not that big a win. And then hydrogen's highly flammable, so less explosive than gasoline, but I think you need to be able to do it safely. Think Hindenburg. All right, and then some hydrogen fuel is produced from methane. So if you're going to this is a greenhouse gas, and when you split methane, you get the hydrogen fuel, but you also get carbon dioxide as a byproduct. So that's not so great. All right, so again, Miller has some trade-offs with your hydrogen fuel cell cars I urge you to look at. So how do we solve these problems with hydrogen fuels? We can make this more viable. Use renewable sources of energy, most notably solar, like I mentioned before. And this is changing, you know, if it's too expensive to use solar, but again, our solar energy is progressing as far as our technology there too. So Sandia, which is a national lab, is looking at ways to use nano devices to use sunlight to split water. So again, all kinds of really cool, smart, creative people are looking at ways to solve our energy issues. And then you can go to hydrogen.gov if you want to read more about it. All right, and then so there are places making hydrogen fuel. These photos were taken by Ms. Weston when she and Mr. Noble went to Iceland a few years back. And again, remember, Iceland, it's a big volcano. So they have all the geothermal energy they know what to do with, but you can't put geothermal energy into your car. But you can use, just like you can use solar, you can use geothermal energy to make your hydrogen fuel. So now not only can Iceland make all of their electricity using geothermal, they have the potential to have all of their cars run on hydrogen fuel, which is generated through the use of geothermal energy. So again, they can be, they're actually planning on being fossil fuel free. I forget which year, but they're looking at doing it. All right, so again, this is just kind of this idea of net energy as far as how much energy does it take to develop something versus how much energy are you using once you get it, so that if it's a zero-sum game, it's not going to work. All right, so what are some more solutions? What do we have now on our list? Improving energy efficiency. Again, that's the low-hanging fruit because we don't have to change our infrastructure. Diversify the grid. You've heard me talk about a lot of these different sources of energy now, and I've mentioned that a lot of them can't be 24/7. The wind doesn't blow all the time. The sun doesn't shine all the time. Water, water is low in the fall after it hasn't snowed for a long time, and we haven't had rain all summer. So, but the idea is that can you combine all of these things together to get rid of our fossil fuel? So the idea of diversifying the grid. All right, give incentives. So right now the fossil fuel industry has a lot of, gets a lot of financial incentives to keep going. Can we give those incentives to companies that are producing renewable energy, developing it, individual cities, et cetera, to replace our fossil fuels with renewable energy? Infrastructure, again, I keep pushing it, but we need it. You can't drive your electric cars across country unless you have that infrastructure to charge them all. You can't have your solar roadways unless you build them. You can't have your wind turbines unless you build them. So again, we need to have that. We need to produce that infrastructure. All right, and then new technologies. Well, there's lots of room for improvement. And if any of you are engineering minded, there is a lot of room to again, increase how we do things, make things better, smaller, improve our battery technology, et cetera. All right, so speaking of battery technology, most of our renewables cannot run 24/7. So we have to basically shift our electricity around on a day-to-day basis using our grid from one place to another. And every time we shift electricity around, we lose some with that waste. So diversifying the grid is a good solution, but in the long term, we need battery technology. We really need a way to store it so that instead of wasting our hydropower here or trying to pipe it off to other states when we have too much of it, could we save it for those times by September when we don't have a lot of it? All right, so for your homes, again, I've been mentioning this Tesla Powerwall because I'm really kind of impressed. This is what, on the previous slide, look at that bottom picture down here. This is what battery technology used to look like. It took up a lot of space. You pretty much needed a whole room in your house. Now you can hang something on your wall, and maybe one or two of these things would be able to store enough store enough electricity so that you could power your home. So the Tesla Powerwall, they want to combine this with Tesla solar panels. And then you can charge your car, you can get electricity for your house. It's a great vision. I don't think we're quite there yet, but especially with the solar panels for your roof, they want to actually make solar roofs. So instead of panels, they actually want the roof tiles to be solar. It's a great idea, but again, I think it hasn't really scaled up yet. So anyway, if you got a big home, you're going to need multiple batteries. All right, and that is the end of our renewable energy series. You can be looking at more solutions in your activities. And our next unit coming up will be on air pollution.